Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Raw Men. I think this is episode number 96. And I'm talking today with Michael Marshall, who is better known as Marsh, simply the one named Marsh. And he is director of as I understand it, a charity called the Good Thinking Society, which is challenging the provision of homeopathy or homeopathic medicines, it being covered by the United Kingdom's NHS or National Health System. Marsh, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Aaron. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It's lovely to speak to you.
Well, thank you very much. We met again. I don't remember if it was for the first time or not. I apologize.
I think we met the previous time you were QED as well. There was a panel we did with Matt Dillahunty and Mitch Benn actually on sort of discussing things with people we disagree with and different techniques of doing it and different approaches. So yeah, I've been around the block for a little bit, really.
It's funny if you hadn't mentioned that panel, I might have. It's funny when you mentioned it. It's like I remember that, and I hadn't remembered it a moment before. So it's like it just departed from my mind completely. So thank you for that. Okay, so and it's a brilliant conference, by the way. I mean, the reason I went to QED again this time, I wasn't invited to speak or anything. I just had an excuse to be in the UK, concordant when your event was going to go on, and I just wanted to be there because it's a good one.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we had a lot of people giving us a lot of really, really positive feedback. And you can't ask for anything more than that, really, as a conference organizer, to have people going away excited about the event that you put on, and sort of, I guess, a little bit reinvigorated about the skeptical community in the UK and Europe and even beyond that, it seems. Yeah.
Well, so it's funny and a bit ironic that the reason that you're doing this interview now, the reason that I wanted to talk to you was because, I mean, sitting at the bar at the conference, which honestly was my bigger goal. I didn't go for the speakers. I went for the social interactions. I wanted to be among intellectuals, skeptics, scientists, and so forth. There were plenty of them there, and these are the people that I just want to get out of Texas, and certainly lately I just want to get out of my own country for a while and speak to intellectual people. So while we're having this conversation, I'm thinking this is a really great conference and all that, and I'm pleased to see some of the things that are being discussed on stage. But what does the conference actually do? I mean, what political changes are we actually affecting? I mean, is it having any pragmatic effect? And that's when somebody suggested right away, well, have you talked to Marsh? Because Marsh, got homeopathy off the NHS. I'm like, really? That's outstanding. So yeah, I want to talk to him because that certainly met my criteria about actually doing something and having some pragmatic effect. Tell me more about that, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, it all started really when I was appointed to the project director of the Good Thinking Society, this registered charity. And effectively, it now means that skeptical activism, skeptical investigations, and things resulting from that are my full-time job. So I kind of have not just the will to do it, but also kind of a little bit of an obligation, knowing that if I'm working for a charity, I really need to make sure I'm knuckling down and getting some stuff done. And when I first started working for us in 2014, we always had a long-term plan to try and do something about the fact that the UK government spends taxpayer money on homeopathic remedies. Remedies that even the UK government admits don't work, but they continue to fund them regardless. They had a big review in 2010. Yeah.
I got to jump in with this because there's a lot of people in the United States that have no idea what homeopathy is. I mean, I went down to my local grocery store and I was picking up some like eye drops for one of my kids, and I noticed that it said homeopathic. I mean, I'm like, seriously? Why were we selling these? So I immediately go to the guy who's in charge of the pharmacy there, and I'm like, this is homeopathy. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what a homeopathic remedy is? And so I tried to explain to him what homeopathy was. And the guy looked at me like I'm some kind of conspiracy theorist. I think that there's reptiles running the government or something. What the hell? He thinks I'm nuts. So I could tell in his eyes that he's not going to do anything about this, that he thinks I'm crazy. So I went beyond him. I went to the general manager of the store and I tried to explain to her what homeopathy was. And I ended up having to pull up news articles or mainstream press describing homeopathy on my phone to show her that, hey, this is not just me being crazy. Look, reliable sources here. But again, I don't think she understood that you can have fake medicine and be selling it innocently. But I mean, that's what it is, right? I mean, you had
completely.
In the United Kingdom, you had, as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong and enhance this if I'm right. You had a hospital, at least one hospital, that was practicing homeopathic remedies. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
how do you do that with something that doesn't work?
Well, there were five, and as we'll come to in the course of this conversation, there are no longer five, and that some of the work we've been doing has had an impact on that. But actually, if we go back before good thinking, one of the first things I've been involved in skeptical activism for about a decade now, and I co-founded the Merseyside Skeptic Society in 2009. And one of the first things we did was in 2010 was a project to demonstrate to people that homeopathic remedies and not real medicine, there's nothing in it. And the way we did that was to get people all around the UK to go into their local Boots pharmacy, Boots being the biggest pharmacy name in the UK, and they sell homeopathic remedies right next to real remedies and don't tell you one of them's medicine and the other one's magic. So we had people all around the country to go into their local Boots one day, buy some homeopathic pills, then everybody all together at exactly the same minute of the day would stand outside of that local Boots and take a homeopathic overdose, to prove nobody's going to fall ill, nobody's going to have any effects at all, because this is just sugar. And the reason we did that is because whenever you saw any interviews with the average person on the street, or whenever you saw analyses of public understanding of homeopathy, most people thought homeopathy means herbal or natural or alternative, but they didn't know it means this has been diluted to a point where there's nothing left in it. So we thought, rather than tackle the science side of things, which scientists have been doing for a very long time, more than a century of science has shown that homeopathic remedies are a bunk. Clearly, the science alone wasn't enough to convince the public that homeopathy doesn't work, because the public are still buying homeopathy. So we thought, instead of that, how do we distill all of the debunking of homeopathy into a single soundbite that the average person, upon hearing it, would think, well, hang on, that's got to be nonsense. And the idea is, if we could get across to people that there is nothing in a homeopathic pill, that's the job done for most people. Some people will be ardent homeopaths and it's not going to change their mind. But the average person who thinks this is just another natural medicine, if you tell them there is literally nothing in this is just a sugar pill, most people will recognize why this can't be effective. And so when we did this homeopathic overdose, the strapline of it was homeopathy, there's nothing in it. We had all people doing these flash mobs all around the country. They take videos of themselves. Everybody would get together and shout, there's nothing in it, before they took their overdose. That all went up onto YouTube. It ended up being the front story of the BBC for the day. It was in every national newspaper. And for a little while, it changed the way the newspapers talked about homeopathy, that they no longer said this is very dilute substances or ultra dilute. They actually said there's nothing in it. And we were weirdly strategic, and I'll come to the NHS stuff in a moment, but we were weirdly strategic about the way even we named the campaign, because we thought, because the newspapers normally say this is very dilute, it's ultra dilute, they never say there is nothing in this. We thought, how do we crowbar that message into the newspaper coverage? How do we force them to cover the science? And we said, well, if we name the whole campaign after the Avogadro limit being that once you dilute something past a certain point, any random sample you take is just likely to be water. You're unlikely to get a single molecule of the original substance in there. And that Avogadro limit is 6.02 times 10 to the power of 23. So we thought, if we call our homeopathic overdose campaign 1023 after the Avogadro limit, and we do the overdose at precisely 10:23 a.m. after the Avogadro limit, when the newspapers cover this, they can't not mention what that number means. And every single story that covered it said the campaign group, which takes its name after the chemical principle that shows there's nothing in homeopathy, did their overdose for these reasons. And we managed to crowbar genuine science and change the narrative on homeopathy to be much more reflective of the chemistry and the reality of it. And it did actually stick for a little while. So it's funny when you say pulling up mainstream newspaper stories to show what homeopathy is. I think we certainly weren't the turning point. There were many, many other steps along that road, but we were certainly one of the turning points, from newspapers credulously and uncritically talking about homeopathy and saying this is very dilute and people use it for these reasons. These days, if homeopathy gets mentioned in the UK press, it's overwhelmingly negative, because it's realistic. So the press won't tell you the story about homeopathy. They won't give you the homeopath version. They'll give you the science version. And we were one of the milestones along that way. And because we recognize that media coverage is so important to the way that people understand what this stuff is. When you're just living your regular life, you're not reading scientific papers, you're not paying attention to every single thing. You can't be across everything. So yeah, that was kind of where we started. And weirdly, when I started with Good Thinking, it was the fact that we'd done that homeopathic overdose in the UK, and then we did it internationally in 70 cities in 30 countries around the world. we actually had a research scientist in Antarctica taking a homeopathic overdose on the second 1023 campaign. The video is brilliant. He's got this massive glacier behind him and he's spraying this homeopathic spray on his tongue. It was absolutely delightful. But because we got a lot of play on that, when I started working for Good Thinking, we got contacted by a law firm who said, look, we're just looking into this. Have you ever looked at whether it is even legal for the UK government to spend taxpayer money on homeopathy, given that in 2010 they did a full review of the evidence and came to the conclusion that it does not work and could not work? So the fact that they are still spending taxpayer money, have you ever looked at what the legalities of that are and ever looked at what the commissioning decision-making process actually is and whether you can challenge that? And that's really what got us started on, it was the first sort of chink in the armor really of NHS homeopathy, is that it got us looking in the right places. Because the astonishing thing is, I've known for a long time that the UK government funds homeopathy. It's been a well-known fact amongst skeptics, amongst doctors, but curiously, nobody knew how much the government was spending, because there was no head of homeopathy for the UK whose job it is to sign off the bills. Can
you imagine being assigned or elected head of homeopathy?
Well, it'd be a pretty cushy job. I mean, I'm not sure how you'd feel going in every day, but certainly you wouldn't have to work too much overtime, I don't think.
I would guess not, but continue, please.
But yeah, so because we didn't have a head of homeopathy, and in fact, the way most things are commissioned in the UK, and on the National Health Service, which is the crowning achievement of our country, is one of the most remarkable things we've done as a country, is the NHS. The fact that we can get free healthcare at point of sale has been a boon to people across our country. But the fact that most things that are prescribed on the NHS and commissioned and paid for, the decision isn't made at a central government level, it's made at an individual county level, a bit like a state, very, very small kind of level. And there was nobody involved in the NHS whose job it was to ask every one of those local health bodies how much they were spending on homeopathy. And for that reason, nobody in the country had any idea how much we were spending. And so that's the first thing that I did in this homeopathy campaign, was using the Freedom of Information law, send requests to every single local NHS body to say, how much did you spend over the last 3 years on homeopathy, and what contracts have you got, and when are those contracts ready to expire? And so we got to the curious position, having sent out literally hundreds and hundreds, I think it was nearly 300 of these FOI requests, and chasing them all up and chasing down all the bureaucracy of it. We were in the strange position where I was the first person in the UK to know how much the UK was spending on homeopathy. And whenever the government now mentions their spending levels, or whenever the media mentions their spending levels, they're talking about my data, which is a very surreal thing to see the government then citing the data you've gathered about what they're spending. But yeah, so that's how we knew that the UK was spending. When we started, it was around about 2014, and they were spending around about £5 million a year on homeopathy. Something that region. There was a couple of question marks around London that are way too boring to get into. But looking at the way the figures broke down, we were pretty confident in saying it was around about £5 million. And that was already a decent sized figure. £5 million isn't nothing. It's not the biggest spend on the NHS. But if you work it out in terms of the number of people who could have a hip replacement operation, or the number of MRI machines, or the number of nurses, that's a pretty substantial figure once you kind of equate it that way. Especially if you talk to doctors and they have patients who they have to turn down for treatments that could work, that actually have got some evidence because they're deemed too expensive. So that patient walks out the door being told, I'm sorry, we can't help you. The next patient walks in saying, I want homeopathy. And the doctor had to say, okay, I've got to give you homeopathy because it's what we do.
I just want to make sure I understand that. So somebody walks into a conventional hospital and they deny him coverage because it's too expensive?
For some things, it'll be for... I think there was some interventions around things like varicose veins, elective surgery for things that would improve.
So we're talking about elective surgery.
Life.
We're not talking about anything, life-threatening.
No. If it was life-threatening, then the budgets are certainly there. But it was around the elective stuff that would just improve your quality of life. And some people, I spoke to doctors who said we had to say no to those people because our local health board assesses what our budgets can and can't afford, and we can't afford to do that particular intervention for enough people. But our local health board at the time was funding homeopathy. So you could see a patient, the very next patient could walk in saying, I get migraines and I need to be sent to a homeopath. And you'd send them there because it's part of the care pathway that was ascribed by the local health board. So there was this incredibly frustrating situation.
So you mean what would just give me a hypothetical? What would somebody be diagnosed? What would somebody's problem be that they can't get health care, but they would be given homeopathy? Just any kind of ailment.
Yeah, well, so there's a range really. So there were things like infertility. There was some things for anxiety. Pain is a classic one because there isn't a good solution to pain. Certain types of pain, we don't have a good solution for it, and that's the key really. And it's why I'm very careful never to say that the people who go for homeopathy should be blamed, are gullible, are foolish, or anything like that. I really don't believe in that, because I think people who turn to that stuff, especially on the NHS, would see it as, this is the NHS. We trust the NHS. I've been told this is what the NHS will give me, so it must do something. But typically, there'd be patients who they'd have a certain condition that might be a chronic condition. It might be very hard to treat. Half of the patients with it will get better if you give them this treatment, but half of them won't. So you take that second half and you give them this other treatment, and 60% of them will get better on that second treatment, but 40% won't. And if you filter your way through enough of those decisions, you end up with some patients who unfortunately have tried all of the things that are available and it hasn't helped them. And so for some of those patients, they'll turn to homeopathy and they'll feel like they get an excellent service out of that because they're talking to a homeopath for a long time who's really listening to them. Ultimately, they don't fare any better. Ultimately, their pain doesn't get any better. So ultimately, it's not a good use of the funding. But I can certainly see why patients would go for it, and why healthcare really has to kind of understand how to deal with those patients to make sure they've been listened, they feel like they've been listened to, feel like they're being valued, and not sort of dismissed. But that's kind of a separate thing, really. But yeah, it was things like that. So yeah, chronic pain. But fertility was one of them, and no amount of sugar pills are going to increase your fertility. All that's going to do is increase your hope that your fertility rates are going to change, and either you're going to get lucky or you're going to be disappointed. Those are the only two options, really. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember being, as a kid, if you get a cold or something, they would, my family would do these weird rituals about putting Vicks vapor rub on your chest, and putting your t-shirt in the oven, so you have the Vicks in your chest. They put the t-shirt over you. What are you doing this for? I mean, okay, so I feel good that you're caring for me, that you're going through these little special rituals and everything. I mean, but the only thing I actually believed in was the chicken soup. and I feel kind of stupid about that now, but I mean, yeah, when you have some, you believe that chicken soup, I was always told that there was some enzyme in chicken products that this was going to actually help you in curing the common cold. So yeah, you have a warm bowl of chicken soup, but doesn't that just feel good anyway? I mean, really, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
If you have a cold, so we just attach these positive associations, I guess, to certain things. And so if you think you're taking medicine, then you get a kind of a placebo effect out of it, much as I still do, knowing that chicken soup doesn't do dick for my cold. But I've just decided that, if I'm ever going to get a cold, I'm going to enjoy being miserable for that day. I'm going to really make the most of it, and I'm going to get my chicken soup, damn it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It doesn't change your condition, but it changes how you feel about the condition staying the same. So you're in just as much discomfort, but you feel slightly more comfortable with that level of discomfort because you're having some sort of care around you. And I think that's a good way of looking at what homeopathy and the placebo can do as well. Is it's not going to change the outcome of what you have. It's not going to make things go away faster, but you might feel a little bit better because you feel like you're being cared for. And that would be great if there was an infinite budget on the NHS, but unfortunately there isn't. And so when money's going off to that stuff, it's money that isn't going elsewhere, and that was the big problem for us, really.
Well, the other problem, the reason that we don't know so much about it in the United States is, of course, because we don't have an NHS.
Yeah,
right? So we don't have this sort of thing being covered. But we're still selling the stuff in our pharmacy. And so this is just wrong. So people are going in there, as I did. I mean, I walked in getting medicine, expecting to treat one of my kids. I had a problem with their eyes, so I needed eye drops. So I'm upset that I'm going to buy something that says it's going to do something, and then it says homeopathy, and now I know that it doesn't. And people need to understand. For the Americans watching, I want people to understand what's wrong with homeopathy. I mean, if you have an eye irritant, or you have, let's say, just in general, there was some medications that have belladonna. Why belladonna? Yeah. Is it because it was commonly used in witchcraft? That would be appropriate here. But is it also because it's a poison, and it actually causes some of these irritations? So if you put a tiny bit of belladonna in the water, and you dilute it X number of times, and I think it actually says on the box the number of times it's diluted, right? Does it?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay, so it gives you an indication of the number of times it's diluted, where you pour in that drop and then you pour in another drop, mix it out. I'm not sure how they do. You'll probably have to explain how they dilute it, but they do it a number of times until there is, as you said, in Avogadro's case, there is statistically not even a single molecule of that poison in there anymore. But the belief is, and this is the really crazy part, you start with the poison, you start with the thing that makes you sick, and then you dilute that till it's gone effectively. And that's supposed to become the cure to itself by not being there anymore, because the water remembers it being there.
Yes,
so
yeah.
If only, what is it that, I guess fish poop cures everything?
Yeah. I mean, so this is the sort of strange nuts of logic you get into when you start really scrutinizing how a homeopathic preparation is made and how homeopaths justify their preparation, because they will say that we treat the underlying cause and not the symptom. But if you look at a homeopathic treatment for hay fever, they used to be made out of onion juice. And the logic would be that when you have hay fever, your eyes will water sometimes. When you cut up onions, it'll make your eyes water. So the thing that causes your eye to water, if you take it, your body will learn how to stop your eyes watering, and it'll stop all of it, your eyes watering from everything that's causing your eyes to water. Therefore, onion juice will cure hay fever. But if you look at what that was doing, that's just treating the symptom. So the criticism that homeopaths level against doctors and conventional medicine is that they only care about treating the symptom and not the underlying cause. But a homeopathic remedy is literally just treating the symptom, because it looks at your symptom and says what else causes that symptom on one level. So there's really no consistency through a lot of the homeopathic arguments. And this leads to very strange positions. I mean, when I started really delving into how homeopathy was being commissioned and prescribed on the NHS, I found that most of the prescriptions were coming from one pharmacy in Glasgow. The majority of the prescriptions for the several homeopathic hospitals we had in the UK were using this one pharmacy in Glasgow. So I called them up and asked them what one of their remedies would do. And I've picked the homeopathic owl. They had listed on there, you can buy some homeopathic owl. And I said, is this for people who are allergic to owls? And they said, well, it is, but it's also for people who are taking on the characteristics of an owl. They said, because it could be that you aren't sleeping very well at night. And that's all they said. So the entire characteristic profile of an owl is insomnia.
Owl. What if you take on the characteristics of a wolf? Do they have a like entity?
I think there might have been a wolf on the list. This thing, I looked at this list, and this is the list. I actually recorded the phone call that I had with the lady who was talking me through what the homeopathic owl would do, and I actually managed to publish it in a national newspaper with a little video attached to it to show that when we talk about the NHS, we expect suppliers to the NHS to be rigorously checked and very modern, and this to be levels of government bureaucracy to make sure that they're getting something that actually is what it says it is. But you look at the biggest supplier of homeopathy to the NHS in certainly the majority of the homeopathic hospitals at the time, and here they are saying that people can take on the properties of an owl, and that using a remedy that's been made from the feather of an owl can cure that. It just shows you how at the very heart of this, it is still magical thinking. This isn't the scientific discipline that homeopaths would lead you to believe, that it's moved on since it was invented 200 years ago. It's still in very much that nascent magical thinking mode.
When I brought up belladonna being used in witchcraft, and that was the reason that they brought it, and I already knew it was magical thinking, but I had no idea about using the feather of an owl if you have insomnia and are therefore up at night because you're taking on the property. That's crazy beyond the level of crazy that I thought homeopathy could be. And the worst crazy that I thought there could be was that you had a hospital dedicated to homeopathic treatment. That I thought was the pinnacle of crazy until I found out that you're also trying to cure were owls.
Well, I'll tell you my other favorite mind-blowing thing about homeopathic preparations before I start talking about what we've done about it. So we're not just sort of ridiculing them from a distance, but actually trying to affect a change here. But my favorite thing is the way that homeopathic remedies are made. You take your drop of belladonna at the start and you put that into a glass of 99 drops of water, and you put the lid on, you give that a shake in certain directions, or you bang it against a leather-bound book, as Samuel Hahnemann described, the guy who invented homeopathy in the 1790s, around there. So you've got your drop of belladonna in 99 drops of water. You then take a drop of that into another 99 drops of water and repeat the process. and again and again. And every time you do this, you're diluting by a factor of 100, which is an X dilution. A C dilution. C for the Roman numeral for 100. So the typical remedies you buy from pharmacies are normally 30C, which means you've done this step 1 into 99 30 times. So you're using an awful lot of time, and especially if you look at the higher dilution, the higher strength homeopathic remedies, you might go up to 1000C and beyond that. So you're doing that step 1,000 times. It's going to take you a huge amount of time. But there was a chap who came along, a homeopathic called Semen Korsakov, I believe his name was, who looked at that and thought, this is an awful lot of time. It's also an awful lot of wasted water, because all of these other stages along the way are going to be basically thrown away. And it's also, it's going to take up a huge amount of time to do this. But he said, if you take your jar with 99 drops of water in it, and you put a drop of belladonna in it, and then you shake that, and you pour it out, when you write the jar up again, you'll see there's bits of water clinging to the sides of the jar, which is probably about 1%. So now all you need to do is put 99 more drops of water in that and shake it again. So what he would do is, I believe he'd do it in a fresh stream. I think, I could be wrong on that, but he'd fill it up, put a drop of belladonna in, shake it, pour it out, fill it up in the stream again, shake it, pour it out. And this is now still used by homeopaths, called the Korsakovian method of dilution, which I call rinsing. You've just rinsed that glass really, really well. That's all you've done there. But it's still commonly used by a lot of homeopaths. So if you ever see a homeopathic remedy with K in a big capital letter on the back, that's how that remedy was made, through rinsing.
So do they still use water in a stream?
I don't think they do. I think they'd used distilled water, because it would be ridiculous to still be using water in a stream now. Obviously, if you're going to be rinsing it, you need to do it under scientific conditions. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. Because I mean, you may not have statistically any more belladonna in it, but there's quite a lot of fish poop.
Yes, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Among other things. So you mentioned one other thing I want to address, and I know that somebody watching this show would say that you were, the way you're talking about homeopathy is that that it doesn't treat the underlying cause, it treats the symptoms. We just want to verify it does not treat.
No, it really doesn't. That's what they will say, that what they're trying to do is that, but because these things are just sugar and water, it doesn't have any effect. And in fact, in all the best controlled studies, with the better controls you put in place in a study, the more likely you are to come up with the fact that there is no effect. And all of the studies that homeopaths typically cite to prove that this homeopathic remedy helped curb an outbreak of mastitis in cows, or this homeopathic remedy helped people who had asthma. When you look at the details of the study, often they're unblinded, often there's no placebo control, often there's many confounding factors. There might be very small numbers of patients or people involved. So there are huge flaws in the very best of the homeopathy literature, and then in the ones that are very well controlled, they show there's no effect. So yeah, they really aren't treating the symptoms, and that's why it was so important to us that the UK government doesn't continue to waste £5 million a year on that stuff.
All right, Wes, you are also an organizer of QED, and I would think that you probably had James Randi there at some point. Have you not?
No, we've not actually.
No, James Randi's never been at QED.
No, he hasn't. Unfortunately,
well, let me put in a plug for Randy.
We've talked. It's just never quite managed to get it to come off. Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised that he hasn't been, because of all the places. I mean, Randy. I'm proud to say that he's a friend of mine. He's been very, very courteous to me every time we've seen him. Had me over to his house a couple of times. Very sweet guy, but. He's, of course, famous for being like the ultimate skeptic and for debunking a lot of things. And homeopathy is one of them, where he went into some pharmacy that was selling homeopathic remedies and such. And he gets a warning about the recommended dose, that you shouldn't exceed this amount. And of course, he famously, does that overdose that you all are doing. I think he was the first one to do that on video to sort of demonstrate that. But anyway, since you haven't had him on, but I'm sure you'll have him on eventually. You also do QED, or you're one of the organizers for QED. So this brings me to question how you got motivated to take on the NHS and all these remedies and all of this other skeptical organization. What is it that drives you to do these sort of things?
I think at first I found it. I found that I've always been a skeptic, but didn't know there was such a thing as skepticism. So when I found skepticism, I became very excited about it, and possibly even evangelical. And I think many skeptics go through that phase of going, wow, this thing is amazing. I'm learning so much. I want to tell everyone about it. And you irritate the hell out of all your friends, just as much as possibly an evangelical religious person might for a short period of time. And then I think if you go through that for long enough and you hang around the community for long enough, I think what you see is that there's an awful lot of people who really want to make a positive difference. And for me, that positive difference is I don't like the idea of someone being duped by something when the information is there if someone's withholding that information from them. So for homeopathy, I don't mind someone reading everything there is about homeopathy and then deciding, knowing full well that these are chemically just sugar pills, deciding still to take it for themselves. That's an informed decision. What I don't like is when when homeopathic remedies are next to real remedies in a pharmacy and there's no distinction made by the people selling it. I don't like when homeopaths don't tell their clients what's in their remedies, and they'll talk around it and say, oh, this is very gentle, it's very natural, but they won't tell them how it's made and they won't tell them what's in it. And I think many homeopaths, I'm not convinced that many homeopaths sit down with their clients and say, oh, by the way, this is diluted to a point where there's nothing in it. So I think there's an information gap that I think it's kind of our responsibility as people who care about other people. It's our compassionate responsibility to fill that information gap. And it's something I've written in the past when I've written about this for The Guardian. For me, I don't believe for a second that I am any better than anyone else, any better than anyone who believes in this stuff, any better than anyone who follows alternative medicine. I've just come across the right information at the right time. If I came across the wrong information at the worst point in my life, when I might be suffering from a chronic illness or even something more serious than chronic, something that might be life-threatening, I don't know for certain that I'd have the awareness and emotional stability to assess that hope that was being offered and recognize it as false hope. And so I think I'd be vulnerable enough possibly to believe in it, believe in something. And I think it's therefore I'd want the people around me who weren't blinkered by their vulnerability to tell me when something I was following was wrong, because otherwise I could be seriously harmed. I think that's the duty of skepticism, is to care for the rest of our community and to understand that we're no better. We might also go blindly into believing something that we haven't fully checked or aren't in a position to really rigorously evaluate. So I think it's, for me, skepticism is an act of communal compassion. It's watching each other's back so that you know that there's someone there to watch your back when you need it. So that's the big motivator for me, really.
All right. Well, I feel very much the same. I'm aware that I have many times discovered prejudices that I didn't even know that I had, and so you can't cure them if you don't know that you have them. That you can't begin to address that, and that I've held irrational positions on a number of things, and then of course again. You have to examine. You have to be ready to examine your own position. But then I'm especially outraged when I see other people being lied to. I know I don't like to be lied to myself, but for whatever reason, I'm especially outraged to see somebody else being lied to. And I think that's where we share a common goal.
And I think even by lie, I mean, it's hard because I don't think I've met a homeopath that I would say was lying to anyone. I think every homeopath that I've met, and I've met quite a few of them now, I think they utterly sincerely believe that they're helping. They really are motivated in the vast majority, if not all of the cases, as far as I can tell, by a desire to help people. They're just helping people with all the wrong answers, as best I can tell. And so that's the thing, is that their intent is absolutely good, but unfortunately, what they're delivering with that intent is absolutely wrong. And so that's the keys, really. I don't like to say that, these homeopaths are gullible, evil, con men, manipulative, because I just don't think it's true. I don't think it's borne out by the evidence or the experience.
Well, on that point, I mean, I did tell you that I held irrational beliefs once upon a time, and I believed a number of crazy things that I was absolutely convinced about, and so I'm painfully aware of that reality too. I would like you to say one more thing, if you can, just to give a general idea of the Good Thinking Society, which you called a charity. And I'd like to hear an explanation about that.
Well, I can, and then I'll just tell you because I've talked about everything we did up until we really started challenging homeopathy. I haven't actually touched on what we actually did, so I'll summarize that pretty quickly as well, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the Good Thinking Society was a charity started by Simon Singh, the science writer, and the idea really was that there was a lot of people doing things in skepticism in the UK, activism, in their own time. And it was a hobbyist thing. People were following their interest where they could. But because it was a hobbyist thing, it wasn't necessarily coordinated. It wasn't necessarily focused. And when the going got tough, if you're doing it as a hobby, you might start looking elsewhere because you find something else interesting to do. So the idea of good thinking was, how do we pick up those pieces, and when the going gets tough, we push through. And that's what really we've been doing with good thinking. So when it comes to knowing for the first time how much money the UK government's spending on homeopathy, that's the point where the going starts to get tough, because just having the information doesn't stop it, doesn't challenge anything. You have to know what to do next. And so what we actually did was we looked at every single part of the UK that funded homeopathy and actually literally put it on a map to say, where are they, and what pattern can we spot? And we found that of all the places that were spending any money on homeopathy, they were all located around the four at the time rather, homeopathic hospitals. So it's pretty clear that if you're near one of those hospitals, you fall within the catchment area of one of those hospitals, you can still get homeopathy on the NHS. Anywhere else in the country, you couldn't. So then we took a look at every one of those local health boards has to sign a new contract when the contract with their current homeopathy supplier expires or needs to be renewed. And so when they sign that contract, there's an opportunity to actually challenge the spending of the money, to say that if you're going to use public money, you have to be able to defend doing so. And you can't defend spending public money on something you admit doesn't work. So Liverpool actually came to sign a contract for, I think it was around about £50,000 worth of homeopathy. And they went through a consultation and came to conclusion, even though everyone in the consultation said there's no reason to keep homeopathy, we should get rid of it, they came to the conclusion that they'd do it anyway. They'd continue, £35,000, sorry, that they would re-sign this contract for £35,000. And we actually funded a legal challenge to say, that's not how you spend public money. You can't have a public consultation and then decide to ignore the conclusions of that for no clear reasoning. You have to have another look at this and make sure that you're spending money responsibly. And so they actually went back to the drawing board, had another public consultation, one that they were then going to follow properly, and got rid of homeopathy as a result of our legal challenge. And once we did that with Liverpool, we were then able to write to all of the places that fund homeopathy and say, we're just going to check when are your contracts due, because if you can't justify the spending of public money, you can't spend the public money on that. That's not us saying that, that's the law. All we're saying is you have to follow the law when it comes to public spending. And actually, so 4 years ago, there was £5 million and it was being funded in, I think, 30 different health bodies around the UK. As of April, or I think it was April this year, August this year, actually, the last of those bodies in England stopped funding homeopathy after we started writing to them and challenging them and saying, you have to be able to justify that. Along the way, 3 of those homeopathic hospitals shut down. One of them has been told it's not allowed to give any more homeopathy out. So we really have been able to have this effect and to stop all of homeopathy funding in England on the NHS by hitting that brick wall and then having the time and the space and the will to push through that and say, what do we do next? Even if it is boring and time consuming and difficult, we can spend our time on that, because fortunately as a charity, it's my full-time job, it's my colleague's part-time job to do these things and to follow those things up.
I have one other question about this, just to make sure that I understand it. When you say that the homeopathic hospital, I'm thinking that all they do is homeopathy. And when you say that they're not allowed to do that anymore and they shut down, that confirms that all they're doing is homeopathy. Is that correct? Or are they mixing it with other medicine and surgery too? Sort
of. So when we started, they were homeopathic hospitals. But midway through, some of them changed to being centres for integrative care. And so they did. So the one in London, it used to be the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital. It's now the Royal London Hospital for Integrative Medicine. It doesn't even say homeopathy on the sign anymore. It was giving homeopathy, but it was also doing acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine and some other things like cognitive behavioral therapy, for which there is some reasonable evidence for some conditions. But they were mixing all sorts of things. And what was actually
were they only doing? I mean, apart from what you just said, I mean, if you're mixing homeopathy with acupuncture, you're not making any progress.
No, you're absolutely not. And what was also quite interesting is that of the thing, I forget the full range of services that they offer. They certainly don't do any surgery, and they don't typically do an awful lot of conventional medicine. I think cognitive behavioral therapy was the one that had the best evidence available. Off the top of my head, they may have had 1 or 2 things, but it wasn't a primary care unit really.
Do these places have like an emergency room, or I mean, or
no? They were mostly outpatients. I mean, there were a couple of inpatient beds, but they weren't ever emergency stuff. It was for things like I say, for migraines and for infertility and for pain management, things that are long-term, chronic, difficult to deal with, and therefore leave themselves very open to having solutions that aren't real solutions being offered to them.
Okay.
But what
So
we found was that this homeopathic hospital had been told by all of the different health boards in London that they had to look at the list of things they were not allowed to give whenever somebody walked through the door, and homeopathy was on that list. And what we found was when a patient walked in, the hospital would look at that list and say, okay, we can't give this patient homeopathy, so we'll give them cognitive behavioral therapy because we're allowed to. Then when the patient was finished with that course, they'd move them to the homeopathy room and say, well, we don't need to look at the list again. We can give them homeopathy now. Because when they said look at the list, they only meant once. They didn't mean look at for every single treatment you were going to give a patient. And that's how they were getting around the way that the law, the rules about spending on homeopathy. And that was one of the things that we were able to stop. Yeah.
The reason I asked is because I'm trying to imagine, how do you run a hospital on homeopathy and I guess acupuncture and whatever other bogus treatments you can think of. I'm sure there's plenty of others that as soon as the show will over, I'll kick myself for not remembering them all. But
yeah.
If you have all these things that don't work, how do you have a hospital bringing in patients on a daily basis with an absolute failure rate? How does this happen?
Well, so I think the thing is, if you look at the evidence in terms of how the patients actually fare, how much they get better at the end of these tactics, then yes, it would be pretty much 100% failure rate, other than sort of natural regression of the disease and natural curative kind of sort of aspects, things like that. But if you were to look at the way the patients feel about it, they will probably tell you they had a great experience there. And that's because they meet some very nice doctors and they sit down with some homeopaths who spend a lot of time with them. So if the hospital wants to portray themselves as being effective, they put forward the patient feedback as to how nice an experience it was for the patients. Now, obviously, that's not really going to tell the difference as to whether these treatments actually work. And that's what a lot of the time you find with these homeopathic clinics is they'll say, well, our patient rated experience is very, very high. The patients really love the experience of being here. And that's not what we measure healthcare on. We measure healthcare on whether you get better or not. But I think, yeah, so that's part of it, is that for a long time, that was the evidence that was being put forward. And it was that the people who go here really like to come here. They think they get a good experience here. And also, when it comes to something like the London Homeopathic Hospital, it's been around for a very long time. It precedes the NHS. It has a royal connection. The former head of the hospital was actually the Queen's physician for some time, up until very recently, unfortunately. So I think that royal connection also, even though there's not necessarily a direct hand of the royals keeping things open, there's a level of prestige that gets piled in. And when there hasn't been a political will to do much about it, and there hasn't really been a public will to do much about it, then it's very easy for these things to be sort of passed along and nobody really questioned them. So it's only once you recognize that you can build a political will, build a public will, that things start to be scrutinized. And that's what we were able to do, really, is to point out that there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about this. Because this is one of the things that we found a lot, actually, is that the local NHS in a particular area would have a consultation as to whether to get rid of homeopathy or not. Now, unless you're watching every consultation from every local NHS, if you're a skeptic who cares about lots of different things and isn't a skeptic for a living, you're going to miss that. If you're a homeopath or you go to a homeopath, you're not going to miss that. You're going to be told all about that consultation. And so in a lot of those cases, the consultation would almost hear almost exclusively from people who are in favor of homeopathy. And people like me and people like local skeptics groups and people who are skeptical activists and skeptical interested people would never really hear about the consultation. And so that's one of the strengths of what we were able to do, is that we were able to find out about the consultations and actually say to people, did you know this consultation is happening? And if so, you might want to lend your views to it. And that shows that they're not just getting a one-sided view of what the public think, they're actually getting a holistic view, ironically enough, of what the public think. And that shows that a lot more people are against it. So the public will, I think, has always been there, but hasn't necessarily had a conduit. And that's what we were able to do, really, is provide that connection between the public who care about this but don't know about these consultations happening and the consultations themselves.
Well, you said it was the London hospital was actually inspired by or driven or orchestrated by the Queen's physician until recently. I have two questions. Is it still the Queen's physician, and how is she still alive?
Well, on the former, unfortunately, he passed away very recently. I mean, that's the reason that it changed, and it was a very genuinely sad thing to read in the newspapers, because you wouldn't want that to happen to someone. But the reason the Queen is still alive, and it's often used as a way of demonstrating that homeopathy is really effective, is, well, the Queen uses homeopathy and she's living as long as she has, so it must be something to it. Well, either that or the Queen is incredibly rich, and when something's seriously wrong with any member of the royal family, they don't turn to homeopathy, they turn to the absolute finest medical treatment that the most amount of money in this country can buy. And also, the Queen isn't working in a factory all her life and isn't doing manual labor. She's lived a certain lifestyle that I think would probably lend itself to an elongated series of health, even without all of the money that she has. So there are lots of reasons we can attribute the Queen's good health to, and I'm not sure homeopathy is necessarily one of them.
All right. Well, I didn't mean to be unnecessarily cynical. So but we did bring up, I think we're done with the homeopathy part, but I do still want to hear about the charity for good thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've been working full-time for this charity for 4 years now, and every day that I work for it is a privilege, because there's not many people out there who can get up and say, the thing that I'm doing for a living is what I really care about, is I'm trying to make a difference on things. And we'll look into all manner of things. So the NHS homeopathy was one side of things, but I actually recently spent 18 months looking at alternative cancer cures and the way that they are fundraised for on places like Just Giving and GoFundMe. And we had a whole feature on that on my research published in the British Medical Journal as the front cover story for the British Medical Journal, pointing out how much money is being raised on those platforms and going to quack therapies or going to unproven therapies, and how many people get their lives get altered in damaging ways as a result of that. So much lost time and lost hope and huge amounts of lost income, people mortgaging their houses to go to a clinic that can't possibly help them. So we're able to shed a light on those sorts of stories, and then also work very closely with the media. So for a charity the size that we are, and I work full-time, my colleague works part-time, and Simon works a couple of days a week as well, and that's the full Good Thinking team, really. We get coverage in the UK national media on average just more than once a week over the last 4 years, because the newspapers now know that when this story comes across their desk that says this thing is remarkable, is it remarkable? Well, maybe we should ask the skeptics what they think about that. Or a newspaper will contact us to say, we're really interested in the work that you do. Do you have a story for us at the moment? Is there anything you're working on that we might be interested in? Is there anything you know about where people might be getting exploited and where you can show the harm in these things? So we've now become a pretty reliable go-to source for the media for a good, interesting, engaging, and also scientifically sound story. And that's a great place to be, to sort of spread scientific skepticism in that way. So we're doing a lot of work in a lot of different areas. A couple of years ago, I even went undercover to meet Peter Popov at one of his faith healing gigs in London, and recorded him using someone from his team as a stooge in the audience for one of his healings. I actually had a video of him doing that. So we like to spread our wings pretty widely and take on anything where we think there's someone being harmed. There's settled science, so we're not on the cutting edge of science. We're looking at stuff that we're pretty confident is either right or wrong, and where we can actually directly do something about it. And that's how we choose what we do, really.
Well, that is outstanding. I would like to include any links that you have for both to notify or donate to your organization, and also to watch any of the videos that you'd like to feature for anybody that's watching.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So, Marsh, anything you want to add? I'm just going to let you make the closing comment or statement.
Well, I guess seeing you at QED, and you mentioned that you liked being in the community of QED, and I think that's one of the things that I get the most out of skepticism. I mentioned the reason that I do skepticism is for the compassion for fellow man, and I think that's something that is increasingly happening in the UK skeptical scene, and perhaps even in other parts of the world as well, where we're moving past the point of saying to people, you're wrong and you're an idiot, and are looking much more at how do we all work together, how do we spread more information, how do we work together as a community, how do we show that this is a community that is open and welcoming and people can join it, and that we're there to help people. And I think the more of that we have in the activism that we're doing and the activism I'm seeing from lots of other people as well, I think that's the stuff that makes our community more valuable and more effective at countering stuff. I've never been someone who has ever changed my mind because someone shouted at me that I'm an idiot. But I think I have changed my mind when someone has calmly and politely explained to me why I'm wrong and pointed me towards the evidence. And I think that's sort of what we're trying to do, and to try and tackle when people are being harmed by stuff. How do we step in and make it hard for people to knowingly or unknowingly harm those people?
A very, very good point. One I will try to take to heart, as I can already hear people. Yeah, listen to him, Aaron.
It's always far easier said than done, but I think it's anything we can all do to try and take that into the everyday skepticism and activism we do in atheism and other areas as well. The more we can do to take that to heart, I think the better we are, and that's my philosophy, at least.
All right. Well, Marsh, Good Thinking Society.
Good Thinking Society, yeah, at goodthinkingsociety.org. Actually, that's where you can find us.
All right. Well, links below. Thank you very much. Night.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaron. I've really enjoyed chatting to you.